We were actually all challenged today by the question of what is the city. So it was super exciting to see Roberto going through the 20th century that travel from this history to think about what leads to the moment today, which is what we largely call the second digital turn. And it's based on the fact that we have big data and intelligence algorithm that makes urban design becoming a black box phenomenon. So today I intend to show you how actually this history also goes far back to the 20th century, and that if we want to critically apply some of these tools, we must first understand where these ideas came from. So we see immensely complex systems with internal workings that are opaque. We can observe with them, we can interact with them, but actually all of them came as far back as the post-war period with 3 significant events that actually led to some of the urban design ideas that we saw were speculative, paralleling larger world history like the oil crisis. And so today we will go through briefly this history. The practice of machine thinking urbanism is crucial to understand it is not merely a new set of tools, but a fundamental shift in worldview. For instance, the epistemology, which is the set of knowledge, is actually derived from digital traces a city generates. The methodology, privilege classification, which is opposing to classical science that starts with hypothesis. And so this is to optimize problems for a machine to learn. Its ontology actually posits that city is a configurable space that can be navigated computationally, and its case study demonstrates a speculation of cities that interface between the built environment and its people. But to truly grasp the implication of this shift, we have to look into the paradigms that inform them. And so we will ask, what kind of mind did or will we build for the city? And this history of intelligence from connectionism, symbolism to actionism, and its consequential urban design proposal is what we will go through. So quickly, just to show that connectionism is the paradigm of neural network, it is very bottom up to say that intelligence is not pre-programmed, but discovered through exposure to data. And through this lens, we understood the city as a complex pattern, a sum of human decisions, movements, and interaction into a probability distribution. Some of the examples we see today are computer visions that analyze millions of street view images to understand subjective policies. We have unsupervised learning that cluster points of interest into urban topologies. We have supervised learning that predict models based on historical data point to forecast future states. However, connectionism also leads to the major black box problem, which is the risk to form digital determinism, where urban policy and investment are driven by the outputs of opaque models whose internal logics and inherent biases does not fully comprehend. We don't even have access to. And the second frames the city as a text to be read, because symbolism is actually the oldest and most classical AI paradigm. It is rigorously top-down and rationalist. It believes that intelligence is achieved by manipulating explicit symbols, rules, codes, and logic. It's kind of like a little bit like how architects work. And so this is from Marvin Minsky, which is what was called the father of artificial intelligence. When he first conceptualized what intelligence is, it's supposed to be a legible text authored by symbolic rules. So the logic is encoded in the explicit syntax. For instance, zoning laws, building codes, architectural grammars, mathematical logics of spatial configuration. And so here the city becomes a generative rule-based space. And as you would learn also at the Bartlett about space syntax, it is a profoundly symbolic theory that it posits that urban space is a graph with social movement encounters shaped by syntactic rules. And even parametric design is actually a way for architects to encode symbolism into a perimeter control slider space. Building information modeling, also a big challenge is how do we help the system understand a column from a door, from a window, and so that's also deeply symbolic. And from the second paradigm, we also get the risk of over-steroid, over-rationalized city where mathematics basically supplement more human-centric quality. The code of the code that actually governs the way we design. So as a critical urban designer, we must challenge the code. Third, and the final part of this history is actionism, the city as an interface to be experienced. And this is a paradigm that lies with the cybernetic history. What this implies is that the city is an interface for action. The intelligence is not locked away in a database or in a rulebook, but you have to perform it in an environment in order to know something. We see it today more and more with autonomous car, that you can put a physical counterpart of that intelligence in real world so we can understand its surrounding. Even digital twin is actually an actionist platform. They're a live, dynamic, and interactive replica of real worlds. And more recently, we've got participatory AI that use interactive simulation to help the AI understand human objectives. But as always, the unpredictability of physical intelligence also has this intrinsic risk that complexity in modeling real-world perception action loops sometimes lead to unpredictable outcomes or unsafe autonomous behaviors. And these unintended consequences due to direct interaction with the environment without human supervision is something that we have to watch out for. So how does this framework of intelligence actually help us to understand what some of the architects and urban designers were speculating back in the 20th century? Well, first, we have the famous case of Cedric Price generator projects. For me, this project exemplified what it means that the city is a pattern to be mined. So at the core, it was a thinking facility in Florida composed of 150 movable blocks and a crane designed to be reconfigured by users. And there will be a central computer that harvests patterns from all these data and generate new layout based on data patterns. So you can see Cedric Price computer was a very primitive machine in a way that it observed to learn through digital traces, but the intelligence comes to what are the decisions actually made through these patterns. And because back then didn't have all of the fabulous digital computer we had, so he came up with a very smart way of articulating data based on a discrete set of grids. And this would then meticulously turn into a series of variables you can compute and guide how the data are harvested with a human-centric framework. And as the architect, he has this futurist vision grounded in context. You can see a lot of the socialism influences from the time of how this automated future will provide truly human-centric environment. And it's an interaction of context, activity charts, and non-human actors as well. So you would see that he actually designed for mouse in his city. And this imagery that he has for the future is actually a city as a machine, automated to cognitive behavior and feedback loops. So somehow it also has actionism in it. And then he would proceed to one-to-one prototyping, something that we see so commonly today, actually went way back to the 70s. And this aligned perfectly with the idea of deriving urban knowledge from a bottom-up empirical data rather than a top-down theory. And the computer becomes a proto-black box tasked with finding correlation without necessarily understanding why. So it's an autonomous feedback loop. For the symbolism paradigm, Archigram's instant city, the city as a text to be read. From the late 60s, the core concept is that the city is stimulated by mobile inflatable media infrastructure that becomes a parasite to a town that is sleepy because of its lack of cultural injection. And so what it would do is to bring the metropolitan culture and information via airships and inject it into the city to activate it. It's very imaginative. So the project's power, it's symbolic critique. It simultaneously presented the town as a text written in boring, outdated language, but simultaneously through the consumption of images that represented pop culture at the time. And so here, the city was a new disruptive grammar of mobility, technology, and pop culture. So its component was the airship, the inflatables, but actually it was more about how the symbolic object represent new routes that activate urban life. And it's not just about consumption or the spectacle. As you can see, the rules are clear. You deploy the infrastructure, you saturate the town with information, and you transform its cultural reality. And actually, it's not so far from what we see with platform economics today, with Instagram, Facebook. All of those are actually doing this, except without the inflatable structures. And so here, syntax is actually the urban intervention extracted from culture. And finally, I'll give the example of Kruger's video plays as a city as an interface to be experienced. The core concept here is to craft this artificial reality where users in these separate spaces will interact with each other and with the environment through computer-generated graphics that project silhouettes into the room. And it's a form of actionism because it feedback between the physical and the digital, something we call phygital today. And the video place is quintessential an actionist project because artificial reality was precisely to emphasize intelligence and meaning created through embodied interaction between the user and the system. The system can be the built environment, it can be the virtual environment, but the important thing is that the machine and the user learn simultaneously by doing. So by reaching out, moving, playing, and the city in this case is actually graphical environment with its social and spatial root discovered through action. This is essentially a perfect metaphor for a simulated participatory system. So what we see here, the nuance between these projects is a strong representative of paradigms and how they begin to hint at a synthesis of framework. So like, for instance, we would see generator relies on a symbolic kit of parts that's activated by actionist user engagement. The instant city is an actionist event to be completed by community experience, whereas the fetal plates operate in a symbolic universe of pre-programmed graphical rules. So I want to show this analysis of how these visionary projects are not just predicting future technology, but actually grappling with fundamental paradigms of intelligence that is statistical, logical, and experiential, but also today define a lot of our approach to using the black box. And in this final part, I would just like to argue that in the 21st century, while we're heading for a synthesis of the spatial intelligence, what should we act as designer to lead this transformation into variables that help us to create more livable habitats? And so from the connectionist is the systems of emergent statistical pattern, the symbolic is constructed from rules, and actionist is experienced through embodied spaces. And together they actually form a contexted territory where the deployment of this intelligence demands very rigorous ethical scrutiny. Therefore, the future of urban design does not lie in a choice of one paradigm over the other, but in a conscious, critical, and strategic synthesis of these paradigms to ensure our tool for speculation is not a reality of an application. So if you see here also from Martin Minsky, the father of AI from the 90s, he already think about how connectionists can form frameworks so that symbolists can act according to predefined symbols. And these give us one of the most prevalent paradigm for the future, which is a neurosymbolic actionism. And in a way, how can we actually use connectionists to perceive the massive reality of city, use symbolic reasoning to codify human rules, and use action simulation to empower citizens to participate in this urban development process requires a recursive thinking loop. So this is what the history and theory module will work with you on. And it's not only to understand the historical event, but also we have to project into the future through this historical event. Without understanding where ideas came from, it's very difficult for us to steer against undesirable future. And so this is the last slide that I will leave you with, that our conceptual journey traced through the city as a pattern, the city as a semantic, the city as a form of interaction. And now this progression faces a critical question that moves beyond the technical paradigm. For whom this intelligent city was ultimately designed? Is it for consumption? Is it for socialist values? Is it for another form of liberated thinking? And also the choice between optimization for efficiency, root compliance, or human well-being is not an algorithmic calculation, but a fundamentally designer-led decision. And therefore, our role as urbanists is to steer the synthesis of this intelligence by understanding the tool and its historical events. We must challenge our century to build a spatial intelligence that remains in our service rather than against our values. And so this is where I'll leave you.